time and get everything situated so that we're able to really get to the meat of the conversation. So good morning, everyone, and thank you really for joining us today. My name is Melissa Sadorf, and I serve as the superintendent of the Stanfield Elementary School District located in Pinal County. And I am also the ARSA president. Our special roundtable today is an opportunity to share some information with you and then also to get your perspectives on what is important to you in your school community as we look towards the state budgeting process. I want to be very clear before we start today that my role in this meeting is that of a discussion facilitator and participant. And I am representing myself as the superintendent of Stanfield, and I am very clear that I'm not here to speak on behalf of ARSA. With budget negotiations heating up, I want to thank you again for taking time for this discussion. Next week, we expect that legislators are going to be very focused on the state budget. And as you know, the state is enjoying record revenues. At the same time, we're facing some very significant challenges across the state, including the cost pressures associated with inflation. I want to state that we appreciate the legislators like Senators Boyer and Bowie, who have advanced some ideas and plans to secure major K-12 investments in education, and others like Representative Udall, who are also working on funding plans. Governor Ducey has some of his own priorities for the final budget of his terms. And then we also know that there are conversations around members who wanted an expansion of school choice. Today, our purpose here is to get an update on the developments and dynamics at the state capitol. And then following that, we'd like to see if we can come together on some key funding priorities so that as policymakers head into those budget negotiations, they know what superintendents across the state believe will make a difference for public education and for student outcomes. As superintendents, I think we really have a unique and important voice in this discussion, and we each have a role and responsibility in communicating what our schools need. To give us an update, and I am not sure if she's here yet. Robbie, is Eileen joined us yet? Okay.
Melissa, I'm sorry, this is Diane.
Yes.
I just texted her and she said her link maybe wasn't working. So
can you send her are you able to send her yours?
Yes, I've got to go to my iPad to do that.
Okay, all right. Well, let's make sure that we can get her in the meeting since she's going to be the one that's going to provide us with some information and kind of set the stage for our conversation. All right. Well, while we're waiting to get her with us, I just want to set the stage on Eileen. And she's the one that really is going to give us an update on the landscape and the moving parts that are in play. Many of you might know Eileen Klein. She has been involved in education policy and state budgeting for the past 20 years. And most recently, she served as state treasurer. She's also served as the chief of staff to Governor Jan Brewer, where she was tasked to lead the state's fiscal and economic turnaround. She's served as the president of the Arizona Board of Regents and the director of policy at the Arizona House, where she started on the Education Committee, and here she is coming in. With the ongoing budget discussions and the historic state revenue receipts, Eileen has been asked to help develop a post-208 position for education funding to encourage additional investment and to help bridge some of the divisions that are at the legislature. We've asked her to give an overview of the landscape and some of the political dynamics and to share her take on how we can best make our superintendent's voices heard in the ongoing budget negotiations. After we've had a chance to hear from Eileen, we really want your thoughts and feedback on the FY23 funding priorities and to share some thoughts on next steps. As we go through the discussion today, as always for our roundtables, I want you to be vocal. If you want to unmute and share ideas or thoughts or ask questions, we encourage you to do that. Also, feel free to use the chat function. I'll be monitoring that so that we are able to get your voice into the conversation. It's really very important that we're not just talking at you, we want to talk with you. So that is how we're going to proceed today. So feel free to use both of those functions. And Eileen, I see that you were able to join us. I'm sorry, it's probably my error on the link, so I apologize, but I'm glad that you're here now. I've just given an introduction of who you are so that we've set the stage for your thoughts on where we are with funding priorities moving into the budget for the upcoming year. So how do you feel about getting us started?
Super great. And, you know, showing up is half the battle. So I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be joining all of you who are superintendents. I imagine the past couple of years have been really challenging. I just want to say thanks for your commitment to public service and to serving all of our students. I know we also have some other longstanding champions and experts on the line here. So I'm not in any way saying that this is the definitive word on everything, but I'm going to do my best to give a synopsis of what I think we're all experiencing. Hopefully this will be confirming, and then we've got lots of expertise here to draw on so that we can make a really good case for our public schools as we head into these budget negotiations. I think our superintendents, our rural superintendents in particular, have an outsized role that can be played right now. We're in a really different space. We are coming off of 208 court challenges, and we have this advent of all of these dollars coming into the state general fund. And for us, while there are some headwinds I'll talk about in a couple of minutes, I also think there's abundant opportunity here if we can have a cohesive and strong message. And it's important now because education has been seen as such a monolithic block over the past couple of years that we really take an opportunity to return to you, our school leaders, our voices of those who are the chief stewards of the dollars and the ultimate responsible person for making sure that the education system works. So I am really delighted to have a chance to be a partner to you in this effort. I'm optimistic that we're going to turn the corner and create some success. And today I hope that I can be of assistance as we put our thoughts together. So for those of you who've been involved in this conversation to date, those of you who have not, I don't want anybody to feel left out or that there's something moving along without you. We've had an opportunity to provide some preliminary feedback, and based on the expertise of some of your colleagues, we've tried to put together some guiding thoughts and principles and priorities so that we can have a starting point and at least get into the conversations. Now that the budget negotiations are heating up in earnest with a lot of the rank and file caucus members, we want to make sure we've got cohesion and, to the extent we can, as many names and entities representing our superintendent and district community, our traditional public schools, on behind a cohesive plan that is also really simple and sets priorities. So let me give you a few thoughts on the landscape generally. Right now, even though legislators are talking about the budget and we have multiple individuals working on the budget, there isn't yet any cohesion around what should be done for K-12. There is a group that seems to be kind of no, not one more penny. Some of that is frustration over things where we still have hangover from COVID issues, school openings, closing, masks, learning drop-off, students disappearing, all of those things that some people think is a reason maybe not to invest now. We have other people who are still frustrated with performance, particularly the performance among low-income students. We have other people who feel like 208 was a breakpoint, that if schools are not going to be part of the legislative process, that why should they be rewarded after what's happened for the past couple of years? And all those other challenges that exist because of the continued desire in a very pro school choice state to invest in alternative methods, to say that maybe this system isn't working. We want to let other opportunities be created, particularly for our low income students. So there is a lot of energy around what more can be done for charters, what more can be done for ESAs. So I don't say those things to be discouraging. I don't want you to be discouraged. I would just want you to understand that these are some of the factors at play. Those are some of the arguments you're going to hear and that we're going to continue to hear. So now let's talk about some of the opportunities and things that I think put a little bit of wind at our back. One is that there is obviously a lot of money. That doesn't make it easy. We've got a legislature that's been dealing for 10 years, as we know, and we've had to deal with a scarcity mindset It takes a while to change the playbook, and it's going to take a while, particularly with the ups and downs, the inflationary cost pressures, and the uncertainty in the marketplace. It's going to create a lot of concern about how much to invest long term. However, there is a lot of money, of 1.57 billion in JLBC's most recent numbers about ongoing. That doesn't include another $1 billion that might be available should the Prop 208 challenges be discontinued. So that would drop more dollars into the bottom line. We also have close to $4 billion in one-time monies. So there's a lot of money, which creates a lot of opportunity. And I think a chance to make sure that the entire system gets lifted, not just part of the system, but the entire system gets lifted. So that's all very positive. There's a lot of competition for the dollars, of course. And particularly when it comes to one-time money, there's still a lot of cleanup to be done on the balance sheet from the Great Recession. You all know, I know better than anybody what some of those challenges have been. However, we have a lot of legislators who were not around then, so they don't necessarily appreciate why it's important to take care of those some of those things. And also, we just have to recognize that there's still pent-up demand in other areas of state government that's going to create other pressures around spending. So those are both opportunity, but also the need for us to make the case for ourselves about why K-12 cannot fall behind proportionally in terms of total spend, and why more investment in the base is needed, not just so you can accelerate learning outcomes, but so you can also hedge against inflation. So a couple more words on that in a minute. So other opportunities, you have narrow margins in the House and Senate between the majority and minority caucuses. That means that every vote counts. And some of the people right now who have been reluctant to come on board to anything that looks like a continuation budget or a skinny budget are firmly in the camp of providing more dollars to K-12. That's very positive. They, rather than holding out a plan as their own, however, I think they're really counting on us and our superintendents in particular to begin to chart the course about where the investment's needed. But it's important from a vote counting perspective that we know that we have some strong support of people who are going to make a difference in whether caucuses move toward a budget and whether we're going to pick up any votes from opposite caucus. So that's, not something that we have to perfect. You've got political experts, including those who are on this call, who can help us navigate that. The point, though, is that we've got some consensus that's building among members of each caucus, both majority and minority, that will be helpful, particularly as we have narrow vote counts. The other piece is that our governor is interested in K-12. While we have just come off a week of celebrating charter schools and school choice, and he's talked about the need to increase investment in those areas, he remains very concerned, particularly about the performance of low-income schools. Your voice is very important to the governor. He respects you. You know this firsthand. I know it too. He respects you as the CEOs of these districts. And so I think that the initial conversations we've been able to have with his team suggest that your voice, your priorities are something he's going to weigh carefully. And obviously, with him being in his last year, his total commitment to K-12 and what he can say he's done for the system really matters. And that matters more than the continuity that the legislature might feel the need to have right now, because another legislature will be back next year. He will not. And so we want to make sure that we're messaging really clearly so we can help them have a successful conclusion and one that really rewards and respects K-12. So while I'm sure that there's been a lot of frustration there around 208 or other court challenges, I'm encouraged that they're wanting to move past that and really figure out what we can do with this budget to make an impact. With that, workforce remains an enormous concern. Our state is going to have another million people by 2030. That means we'll have 8 million people in this state. That's going to put enormous pressure on our public education system to be able to deliver so that we have the workforce that's available. Other states are picking up on the same playbook of having a competitive environment for business plus a very strong workforce. And I think that plays in our favor because you are the predominant suppliers of the workforce. When you think about it from a macroeconomic point of view, you're very focused on individual students, student outcomes, but from a system perspective, you are a difference maker in how the state performs in that space. And right now, that is incredibly important to policymakers and to the governor. And then finally, in terms of both opportunities and pressures that you're feeling. Inflation is a big deal. The legislators, they get it. It is consistently in the top 1 or 2 issues for both parties, how to combat inflation. And I think we've got a good case to make about how inflation has impacted your operation. So you've got a chance to tell your story, what it means for, you've already got perennial challenges around your own workforce, having talented people in your schools, the costs are going up. And I think we can really articulate that case well for policymakers. So I'll pause shortly after this, but let me just bring this together in terms of what the ask should be. So far, the feedback we've gotten from your superintendent colleagues is really, let's stay very focused on the base. Let's make some additions around weights to the base that could be really helpful to advance what we need to do to help students make progress, particularly our students, the costs associated with educating students in special education, the additional costs we all face and learning challenges we face because of the persistence of poverty. Those are 2 key areas where we think there's a lot of support and opportunity, plus the addition of base funding. We have also tried to chart a course around some one-time dollars that can be very helpful. And again, we want to help make the case that we need to go above and beyond the normal inflation adjustments this year in particular, not just because there's money, but because you need the dollars to help offset the additional costs you have. So even if it looks like a large give for them at this point, much of that's going to be soaked up by inflation, and you still need dollars to be able to innovate and deliver. So that's a very quick snapshot. We can get into the details, but if it's okay with you, Melissa, I'll just pause there, and certainly happy to answer any questions, but give you a sense and a flavor of really what the moving dynamics are and what I think are really good opportunities are.
Fantastic. Well, and I appreciate you setting the stage for our conversation, because I think having that context is going to be important as we talk and collaborate for the rest of the time that we're together. Yesterday, Robbie Corpich, who's the superintendent of Holbrook Unified, and Greg Wyman, who's the superintendent of the J.O. Combs Unified District here in Pinal County, and I were on a morning scoop with Grady Grado. And I want to invite both of them to provide a synopsis of that conversation that we had yesterday by providing some of the details that we discussed and how what Eileen is talking about translates to what does it look like in the field. And so I'd like for the 2 of you, if you don't mind, to kind of give us an example or 2 of the historic gains that we have with the state revenue and how it can be utilized in our districts. How does that impact you, with some specifics? And then as we move through these discussion points, please feel free to raise your hand to put things in the chat so that you're able also to provide some anecdotal information for your colleagues around what we're talking about. So Greg or Robbie, whichever one of you wants to start first.
Hey, this is Greg. I'll go ahead and start. And I think, Eileen, to some of your stuff, I'll give some specific numbers because I don't know that everybody knows what we're talking about. I assume they do, but I've been in some settings where they didn't. And so when we're talking about the numbers, to give everybody perspective, first of all, we're talking about $1 billion. So we're looking at 500 million, 505 million to the base. Gives you flexibility. We can talk about that in a minute. 100 million for special ed weight, 100 million for poverty or opportunity weight, 100 million in grant for CTE. Just looking at 10 million for inflation to the DAA. Then we would take a look at a one-time monies of minimum 200 million for DAA. And then we would also want to make sure that we look at a reset of the AEL. If we have to, could take a couple different ways to go. But do we take it in 1 year and then go out? A permanent fix has got to go to the voters. So this may be a 2-year fix or a 3-year fix. You might not be able to just get it done right away. Looking at exempting 301 funds from the AEL. And then taking a look at eliminating Prop 123 spending limits. If you're not aware of that, there's triggers on the Prop 123 money based on how much money we raise. And then finally, is there a way to I know there's a lot of people concerned about a recession. Is there a way to go ahead and take a look at the rainy day fund and maybe carve out some dollars dedicated to K-12 so that if there is a recession on down the road, there's some dollars that can come off the rainy day fund right away. And I think the articles or the argument, especially for many of you that are on this call, is the economic argument. You guys are running the largest employer in your communities. And therefore, and we're putting 85%, 80 to 85% of our M&O dollars into people. And the NAU study in 2012 for the impact of Flagstaff Unified on the city of Flagstaff shows that the dollars, there's a ripple effect. It's not a one-time hit into the local economy. It's a multiple hit into the local economy as the dollars spent over and over and over again. Our kids are your basic foundation for workforce. So whether it's entry-level positions or kids coming out of CTE programs, they're part of the workforce that drives the local economy as well as the state economy. So we need to start talking about public education as an economic driver, as an important economic driver that's pumping in excess of $5 billion into the state economy. We have 94% of all kids K-12 that go to public education. We'll nuance that between charters and traditionals, but there's only 6% that go to privates. And so the conversation needs to be about just exactly how important this infusion of dollars is going to be to continue the economy and the strong economy in this state, and what it means for your local area when you get this kind of money that we push through. If we put it to the base, then you have ultimate flexibility. So what's needed in Stanfield may be different than what's needed in Snowflake or Holbrook, or what's different than what's needed in Morenci. And so we have a chance to go ahead and use it in a way that's different throughout the state, but still to what you need. And of course, we're always accountable to everything we do. So that's not, an accountability is not really the issue. It doesn't matter how we spend it. We'll spend it in a fashion that we can be held accountable to. So that was part of the discussion yesterday, but also part of what I would drive today and make sure that everybody understands that we are talking about in the area of $1 billion of an infusion into public ed. Turn over to you, Robbie.
Thanks, Greg. Yesterday was a great opportunity to get the conversation started. And we're at May 19th, and there really wasn't much being discussed as far as state budget and where we were at. And we're all started to plan our budgets now. We know the budget sheets are going to probably have to be used from last year. And so we are very influential, and we're powerful in our ability to influence how things are played out at the state budget. And we appreciate Stand for Children to be able to facilitate the morning scoop, to be able to start the conversation and then follow up with this conversation as well. And the reality is that there are dollars available. And usually at this time of the year, we're asking for a state budget and an increase in certain items in the state budget. We're saying, where is that money going to come from? How are we going to generate that revenue? We know that there is money available right now, over $1 billion that's available to public education. And that includes charter schools and public schools. And so starting this conversation about how we can reinvest in public education from, pre-COVID, we have had a phase in of increased funding over the last 3 to 4 years, where we were very stagnant for a very long time. And so being opportunistic, thinking about investments, we talked a little bit about education being the driving force in our local economies, as Greg said. We employ over 60,000 teachers in the state of Arizona. We're the largest employer in our community, not only for our certified staff, but also our support staff. We're the economic engine. And if we do not fully invest in education, it impacts much more than just our school system. So this is a stimulus, not just for our school system, but also for our communities. And as we all know, rural schools are declining enrollment. People are moving to better job markets. And so we have to make sure that we have some sustainability. We've even talked, off record, that in our district, we're training our people up just to have the jobs that we need to fill. So our high school kids coming out of high school, we're not wanting to send them off. We're wanting to keep them. We want those people to be our HVAC techs. We want those to be our technology people. We want them to be future teachers. So we've talked a lot about the expansion of CTE programs and the importance of CTE programs as well as college readiness programs. And we also talked about how education is cyclic. So all that money that's coming in is truly a stimulus for education, because we're not saving it. We're not building up. We're not for profit. We're going to spend it right back out in salary and benefits, which can be 70 to 85% of a district's budget. So this is good for the economy. And the more you invest in education, the better it will be for the economy as a whole. We also talked about how the education system is one of the most efficient and effective models for investment, because you all know the amount of audits that you go through, the accountability procedures that you have to go through. I mean, the fiscal dollars are very responsible, and they're targeted towards certain things that have to apply to expenditures. And so this is a great investment into a very highly efficient operating system in public education. We've also talked about the return on the investment of education. And I think this is something that we also need to communicate with our stakeholders and our legislators, is that there is a return on the investment. And a lot of those things are abstract. Sometimes they gauge that off of test scores, but I think we need to promote college going rates. We need to promote graduation rates. We need to promote CTE rates. We need to be able to sell the market, so to speak, how well we really do. You can all walk your campuses today and see probably 100 different levels of success for students, whether that's just that they're at school and versus what the alternative might be, whether that's that they're getting ready to graduate, the work that they're putting into it, or maybe it's a CTE class that you can see the work skills. There's a ton of skill sets that need to be celebrated. And I think, that's going to come up in the conversation. And Eileen spoke to it just a little bit about why should we continue to invest in public education. I think we need to be ready for that. And we need to have our selling points, and we need to make sure that we're marketing ourselves as this is a great investment beyond the state test scores that come out on occasion. And we've also talked about the equity and equality. And Greg talked about the equality of, we want to put money in the base. The money in the base helps everybody, and we want to help everybody succeed. But there's also an equity aspect of that too. There's special education. The special ed study just came out. We're 15% increase in special education population, 5% overall population increase. You all know the feelings and the effects of, we spend over $1 million extra beyond what we receive in funding to educate our special education population. So there's definitely an equity aspect. There's also a poverty aspect. If you recall, back in 2018, we went through the Classroom First Council, and we tried to reinvent the formula, the state formula, and it was so complex that it was just, nobody could come up with that formula. And so the committee just basically came up with the conclusion that we've got a great system, we just need to fund the system. And I think there's a consensus that we do have a good system. Maybe there's some archaic things that we need to go back and revisit, but we need to fund the system properly. And if we could get to $5,000 base support level, we're what, about $4,300, $4,400 right now. If we could get to $5,000 a student, how much of a market would that be for the state of Arizona to say, now we're not, maybe it moves us from 49th to 47th, but we're moving in the right direction. And what victories, as Eileen said, what victories could that be for legislators as well as Governor Ducey? So I think, when we think about increasing the quality amongst the board, everyone, that's important, but there's also equity, and the poverty factors, I think, would impact all of us probably that are viewing this today, as well as there's been some other things thrown out like rural weights, there's been junior high weights, there's been some equity things that potentially could help with some of our students that need that extra assistance. So I think those two aspects of the budget are in play that have never been in play before. It's always been, something's been eliminated, but I think we can get some equity things in the budget as well, because there is that opportunity for the additional spending. So I thought it was a great conversation, a great way to kick off the conversation. I hope we build some momentum amongst our superintendents to reach out to our our legislators, and be able to hopefully influence this over the next couple of weeks.
One of the questions that is in the chat, Andy Smith from Prescott College, I think, right, Andy? Does the teacher and employee shortage in all schools help move the decision-making at the legislature? And we talked about the recruitment and retention issue. We talked about the scarcity of hourly employees. Do you two want to address that?
We did talk about the minimum wage, and I think everybody on here can attest that the minimum wage has had a significant impact on our budget, not only for those that are increasing 50 cents, predicting 70 cents in January of next year.
Right.
So that's a huge hit to us as a district, but also for those top end workers. So we can't keep up with 50 to 70%. So you're giving 5% increase to the minimum wage workers. Can you give that same 5% to your techs, to your HVAC techs, those kind of things? We can't, in our district, we can't keep up with that. So minimum wage was discussed, and I think that's influential, and I think that's something that people understand and can hear, because there's not a revenue source that goes into that. We also have been having some discussion. I think this would be resonate amongst the group, is attracting and retaining staff to rural settings. It's very difficult. We're hiring 40% of our teachers that we're hiring this year will be a non-traditional education path teachers. So we're hiring people with sociology degrees or psychology degrees and putting them in the classroom. And then when that first day of school comes, then we've got to train them up. And so we're in discussions of how do we do that? How do we do that internally? And we probably need coaches in all of our buildings to be able to work with that particular set of teachers. So there's some expenses that go along with that, and housing. We talked about housing in rural settings. You know, how do we get affordable housing, or quality and quantity of housing in rural settings? So there's so many dynamics that I think that we can speak to on how we would invest these monies into the most important part of a school system, which is our teachers and our human resources. Greg, did you want to speak to that as well?
Well, I would think, I see Carolyn's comment in there. I think the stories that you tell about how the local control of this money can be beneficial to you is going to be critical when you're talking to your legislators. I think the movement will become more as she's describing that, hey, if the teachers go across the river to Needles, go up to Nevada, they get the 10, 15,000 more. If there's dollars in here and I can do something with those dollars in my base, and I can change the base for my employees, and I can keep my employees, I think that has more power, especially within your set of legislators that represent you. And so I think that's those kinds of stories that we utilize, that you personalize what's happening to you and what this can mean to you in a positive light, is probably the most important thing. As a group here, we can get into all the little nuances of what's unique to everybody and what we're all struggling with. But I think that message is much more about, to your legislator, to the place that they live or the area they represent. This is what it means for me. This is what we can do. This is, but also celebrate what you're already doing and say, this is how we can expand. There's so many innovative things that are happening in our state that get lost in the shuffle. So this is not just about taking the money and running it all in one spot. It's about how do we maximize those things that we're already doing that are having good return on investment. I know Melissa and Wes, you guys have been working on the last mile project. You got last mile projects. You got innovative partnerships with employers in your area. You got internships that are taking place within some of your CT programs. All of those kind of things can be benefited by these dollars, and you'll get great return on your investment in these dollars through these kids. And so I think the idea of celebrating and sharing what this means to you and personalizing it to the legislator, because as Eileen said, I mean, this is going to be across party, both aisles. And so therefore, the Democrats are not sitting on the sidelines per se on this one. They have a chance to be players in here. So let's give them help with how this is beneficial to us. I would do that. We can talk a lot about it here, but really take those personalized stories and sell them to your legislators.
And I'll follow up on what both of you are talking about. Scott Menzel, superintendent of Scottsdale Unified, was also in on our call yesterday in the morning scoop. And he's seeing the same things in urban areas. So this is not just a rural issue. This is a statewide issue when we're talking about teacher recruitment and retention and the issues of rising costs of insurance and the stability factor in your workforce. All of that is impacting school districts across the state. So, you know, as you're thinking about crafting that message, it doesn't matter where you are, you're going to have stories that you're able to tell your legislators as well. So, Eileen, do you want to talk to some of the things that people are throwing in the chat around? How do we package this? What do we do as stewards of our district?
Right, you bet. Well, it is important that we put something very simple on a piece of paper. We've done that to capture what these key themes are, what the major funding buckets are. I think you've gotten some good pointers today about where to direct the commentary. I would just reinforce that we have a lot of new legislators. We can't take for granted they necessarily understand and appreciate the conditions you're facing. At the same time, keeping it positive. We're leaders. We're not complaining about this. These are conditions. We're going to tackle these conditions and we're still going to deliver. Those are really important things to reinforce so that we're not criticized as just complaining and looking for more dollars. So we're really, I think you've done a great job of building this business case and explaining the economic impact. So we want to carry forward with those themes. We also want to stay very focused on what you need. We aren't necessarily going to control what their desire is going to be to do for charters. We can talk more about ESAs if we have time. Again, you making the case is most important. So we put together what is kind of a one-pager. It's a long story for one page. Again, we're not trying to perfect it, but we do want to make sure it has maximum impact and that it really reflects what you think the priorities are. Having cohesion among us, centered on around a piece of paper that your representatives can take out, that you can take out and have some one-on-one conversations with. This is the time. And so we'd really like to get your feedback so that we can have a document that we can hand off. So that's thing one. We've already had a great intro yesterday with the morning scoop. So we've already started laying the groundwork here, but we need to get people behind a piece of paper that we have confidence in will make a difference.
And the other thing I would jump in on, I'm seeing some of the different comments about what about this and what about that, and this is the issue we have. When we talked about this, we talked a lot about this being to the base for this very reason. If it gets into all the different nuances of what someone wants to spend it with, and we compartmentalize these dollars, you're going to end up having nobody getting the total benefit, and you're going to start to create potentially true winners and losers. If you put it to the base, number one, it's going to be more protected. Number two, it's going to be subject to inflation. Doesn't matter who's going to get it, it's still going to be inflation. You can then plan and have a more predictable budget in the future. And you can say, in my district, we need to do this. Because we all sit here, some of us get impact aid, some of us don't. Some of us get forest fees, some of us don't. Some of us get dollars for a variety of different title programs. And so it's hard to figure out what everybody gets. And so the message has to be that we want it to the base to get the inflation in. And then we want you to trust us to handle what's best for our local communities, to do what we need to do. But we have to stay united, or we will divide and conquer by we should put it in here and we should put it in there. And we need a this weight for this group and this weight for that group and this weight for another group. And pretty soon we're splintered, and the legislature is looking for a coherent message, and all they're seeing is a whole bunch of chatter on a whole bunch of different ideas. So this one pager that Eileen's talking about is really looking at, if you want to simplify it, I'll simplify it for you. $806 million that goes to the base in one fashion or another, and 200 million that goes to DAA. Boom, done. There is going to be some nuances to it, but we have to get past this breaking each other apart by saying, I have to take care of my problem, so give me extra money to take care of my problem. I think we get further if we stand together saying that, trust us, we are the leaders. We know what our community wants. You go ahead and provide the dollars to the base, and then we move forward with that in a way that's best for us. And I think, because otherwise we all have nuances and uniquenesses, and it gets very, very hard.
And I'll follow up on, I think the counter conversation that some legislators might have is, well, didn't you just receive all that ESSER funds? And so, and yes, that was a great stimulus for our school systems, but what about the sustainability of your technology that you've purchased, and some of the sustainability of the HVAC systems that are still not under your ESSER funds? What about the sustainability of your salary and benefits? Those are things that I think that we need to help them to understand, that those dollars are going to be gone in 2024. And we have the opportunity to have some sustainability and some innovation, really, and putting money into the bank, the bank and the base allows us to have some innovation in our district of things that we have to be able to do to keep up in the 21st century education world. We're in the competitive market, and we need to make sure that we are competitive, and we need the dollars to do that.
There's a couple of things that we know are on your mind in terms of elephants in the room, is what we call them yesterday on the call. And the first one is the AEL, and the second is ESA. And so can we have a conversation, Eileen, around those two things and their impact in the discussions ahead?
You bet. And we have identified the aggregate expenditure limit as being something that has to be fixed. We might wind up with a short-term fix. We know we need a longer-term fix, but we did try to address that in our talking points. And that's the kind of thing we'd work out with leadership if we can get into the negotiations and have our champions at the table. That's really important. So we have articulated that. On ESAs, I will tell you that I don't think the votes are there to do universal expansion for ESAs, but there is a lot of energy to move in that direction. I do think even among some of our chief supporters, there is going to be support to expand ESAs in some fashion, particularly for low income families. No one is asking or expecting you to endorse that policy move or to be asking for trade-offs around any of that. I just want you to know that that is probably going to be part of what gets considered, even as people ask for additional dollars. So the real balancing point is going to be how much goes into the base formula and the spending for K-12, how far for the proponents of ESAs do they think they can take it without triggering a challenge or a referendum? And so that's a calculus they have to make. Again, you don't need to get drawn up in that. You probably shouldn't get drawn up in that. Really, you want to stay focused on what you need in your districts. And again, you're 94% of the student population. They cannot leave behind your schools, even as they pursue other school choice expansion options.
And on ESAs, I would also add, in the one pager, we don't speak to ESAs. Let someone else bring up the issue. You don't have to bring up the issue. But at the same time, this is, as Eileen said, balancing this out. Let's see, $1 billion, possible small expansion of ESAs. $1 billion, possible small expansion of ESAs. I mean, this is negotiation, this is politics. And so therefore, the good of the many, if we can't craft a deal and take a deal, do we really, honest to God, think that we're not going to have vouchers in the future? Do we think that someone's not going to come down with universal vouchers next year, especially if we go redder than we think they're projecting and not purple? The vouchers are coming with, as long as we're red or deep red. And so therefore, what do you give up in order to get $1 billion? You don't have to bring up the issue. And I agree with Eileen, I wouldn't bring it up. If someone asks you for it, you can work your way around the fact that you're not in favor of ESAs, but we understand in politics that sometimes deals have to be made, but it's still $1 billion, guys. And at $1 billion, this is not going to be the whole thing. There'll be pieces, quite frankly, that the governor may put in that we have heartburn with, results-based funding. But you're back to, in a perfect world, everybody gets all that they want. Nobody else gets anything. I did something with compromise recently. And the only thing I could find with a little cutesy picture of compromise was compromise is I win and you lose. That's not what I thought compromise was. And so we have to remember that compromise means in some cases, we're going to have to truly compromise politically, but for the good of our kids, $1 billion, I'm willing to do some compromising, however I have to sell that.
I want to make sure that people, because Carolyn asked the question, are you going to get a copy of the one pager? And the answer is yes. We'll make sure that we send it out to everyone. What would be very helpful for you to provide input on that one pager? what are the things that are of concern to you? What can we provide feedback to Stand or to the group at large so that we are able to make sure that we have your input on this document? It is a working document. You'll notice it says a draft, but we really would like to have your input as we move forward. So if you're able to provide that, that would be great.
Right, and I think the purpose of the document is to give education priorities for us. And so when you start talking to legislators and you start talking about the priorities of the economy, of funding to the base, of taking care of issues like SPED or poverty weights, opportunity weights, you can take these and keep it a high level conversation of talking points.
Mhm.
To be honest with everybody, guys, but there's already most of these ideas floating around. This is not like this is some set of ideas that nobody's ever heard about and this is going to be, wow, where'd you come up with that kind of stuff? This is stuff that's been floating around. You can just get to your legislators, get to your boards to say, hey, there's a set of priorities that we have that we believe really strengthens the economy and our role in the economy and helps our kids. And so we would be supportive of these conceptual ideas, put it to the base, give us some additional DAA, take care of some issues like SPED or
AEL.
AEL. It's those kind of ideas. So these talking points can be communicated back to your legislators right away. And it gives a point where all of public education gets to be in a very similar space. Instead of being divided, we are all coming forward with the same spot of this is what we think is a good deal, or a good starting point to have a conversation, rather than balancing and battling between each other for the variety of different issues that we have. And I think that's what I would really take away from this is how do we get your partners, the guys, there's what, 40, 39, my eyesight's not good enough, but 39, 40 people on this call. So where's the 200 other superintendents? Where's the other charter operators? Well, you're going to have to go out to them too and say, hey, these priorities are good priorities and they're worth pushing these priorities across the state so that we hear a combined voice from everybody, whether you're rural or urban or suburban, and you can go ahead and get that voice to the legislators. That's the ask out of here. Get to people to start getting the support for these priorities so that they can get into the conversation for the budget.
And the other thing, as I'm watching the chat, one of the things that kept coming up was full day K. There's a couple other things that were in there as well. That's the context that you need to approach your legislature in terms of, this is what we would use this increase to the base for. Here's what's important to our community. This is how that increase to the base is going to help the students in your legislative district. This is the program that we're going to put in place. Here's the innovation that we're going to continue to provide our students. So those kinds of contextual stories are the things that make a difference when you're talking to your legislator.
The other thing I would say, for a lot of times people always ask about, I'm never at the table. I'm never at the table. All the conversation is done behind closed doors. How do we get to the table? When do I get to the table? Here's your opportunity to get to the table. If we have a unified voice in terms of what the talking points are and the rationale is, and the Democrats are going to play a role in this because it's going to have to be bipartisan to be passed, you have a chance to get to the table and, quite frankly, get the Democrats to the table. It may not be the traditional way, but this is a chance to take these talking points and get to the table to go ahead and drive some of the conversation about what we need. And I would use the talking points with that notion. Don't wait for somebody else to do it for you. Step up and do it for yourself and get to the table by communicating to your legislator or getting your local mayor and council to step up and say, this is good for your community, and get them to help you out. That's what the political influence is all about. So I would strongly take this opportunity to be at the table and get to the table probably more so. I've been doing this 22, 23 years at this level. And this is probably the one time we've been more at the table than any other time in my career.
Yeah, and I would also reinforce that the conversation of the dollars are there. We're not asking for them to come up with a solution to find the dollars. The dollars are there. And that's a powerful conversation to have with a legislator, because they don't have the excuse, how would we pay for that? We'd have to raise taxes, whatever it might be. It's there. And so this is very opportunistic to, number one, build a relationship with your legislator in a very positive way. And then also to have a productive conversation about the possibilities, not necessarily all the things that are wrong, but the possibilities that lie with a budget this year, and how we can all celebrate this when we're done. I think this is historic. I've been doing this for 13 years, and I've never been in an arena like this at the state budget time where we have this opportunity. And we used to say there's $1 billion in the bank. Now there's $4.5 billion in the bank. Arizona's doing well, and education needs to reap the benefits of that, because we're such a economic stimulus for the state of Arizona.
Eileen, any last thoughts on what next steps our superintendents and those on the call can take?
Thanks so much. First, thanks again for the chance to have this conversation and for everybody rallying around this. We'll send out the one pager. If you could possibly get any feedback, really, again, we're not looking to perfect it, but if you generally think that this is something that you can use and agree with, please let us know. Send us any immediate feedback, that changes that need to be made. We'd like to have something in hand so that you can all begin this outreach by tomorrow, and that we can take it up with some of the people who are looking for this input. We aren't calling this necessarily anybody's plan. This is not a plan. This is separate from anything other legislators have put forward. Really, we just want a document that we can say with confidence that our superintendents believe will really make a difference to schools. So if we could get that tackled, if you need any help, let us know about who best to start with your own local leaders, and then we can build out from there. And then if we could, Melissa, we'll just make a point to stay in touch somehow over the next week or so, and make sure that we've got some people for immediate feedback as we get opportunities presented to us.
Absolutely. We'll be sending a recording of this meeting out to everyone, along with the one pager directly following this meeting. And please feel free to direct any comments, questions, or concerns that you have around that one pager to me directly. I'll make sure that my email is included in there as well, and I can forward those along. And those of you that are wanting to stay on, if you have specific questions or input that you'd like to provide right now, we'll stay on the call. For those of you that have other things to do at this busy time of the school year, really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us this morning, and getting your feedback and input is much appreciated. Thanks everyone for joining us, and enjoy the rest of the school year. Hope you have a great summer.